On a secluded island off the coast of Scotland, Mason lives alone in an abandoned lighthouse with only his loyal German shepherd for company. From the window, he watches as a man and his niece, Jessie, arrive by boat, bringing his weekly supplies. Jessie rows the small boat the rest of the way to shore and quietly leaves the supplies outside a small shed. Even though she has never seen Mason face to face, she leaves a small gift for him before heading back. After she leaves, Mason steps outside and collects the supplies, but deliberately leaves the gift behind. He takes a swig of vodka, feeds his dog, and passes the time playing chess alone while listening to the radio. That night, just like many nights before, Mason suddenly wakes up from another terrible nightmare. Over the next few months, Mason continues the same quiet, repetitive routine. One day, as Jessie is about to drop off the supplies, her uncle tells her to hurry back since the weather is starting to turn. She nods, but instead of leaving the supplies by the shed like usual, she walks up to the front door and knocks. Mason opens the door and, without saying much, he grabs the supplies and bluntly tells her not to come up there again. Jessie stops him and points out that most people would at least say thank you instead of slamming the door in someone's face. Mason simply closes the door. Annoyed, Jessie shouts that she isn't afraid of him. She leaves the gift on the doorstep and heads back toward the boat. Her uncle calls out for her to hurry, as the wind is picking up and the waves are getting rough. Despite the worsening weather, she climbs into the small boat and begins rowing away. Inside the lighthouse, Mason's dog looks up at him.
Give me that look.
Outside, Jessie nearly reaches her uncle, but suddenly a powerful wave crashes into the boat, causing it to capsize. From the window, Mason sees the boat going under. He rushes outside, jumps into his own boat, and heads into the rough sea. Diving into the water, he manages to pull Jessie free from a tangled fishing net. Mason brings Jessie back to the boat. After several tense moments of chest compressions, she finally coughs and spits out water. By evening, Jessie wakes up and weakly asks Mason where her uncle is. Mason sighs before quietly telling her that he drowned. Jessie sobs quietly while Mason watches her with a hint of sadness. The next morning, Mason checks the swelling on Jessie's foot. Then he replaces the strip of cloth with a fresh one. Jessie asks why he hasn't informed anyone about what happened yet, but Mason simply tells her to get some rest. He then pours himself some vodka and takes a drink. Jessie argues that he needs to take her back since her family will be looking for her. She also asks what he's even doing here, because her uncle told her this lighthouse hasn't been operating for years. Mason calmly tells Jessie that she doesn't really have any family, since her mother died a few years ago and her uncle had been the one taking care of her. He then adds that she never knew her father. He gets up and goes for a walk with his dog, leaving Jessie surprised and confused. Carefully getting out of bed, she starts looking around for clues about who Mason really is. During her search, she finds a knife and keeps it with her for safety. She limps back to the bed when she hears the dog bark. A moment later, Mason walks in. That night, Jessie whimpers in her sleep from a nightmare. Mason approaches to calm her, but she suddenly pulls out the knife. Unfazed, Mason tells her it was just a dream. After reassuring her, he briefly explains how to properly use the knife to defend herself. He then checks her ankle, but the swelling still hasn't gone down. The next morning, he helps Jessie to the bathroom. Then he sits down and begins sketching his dog to keep his mind calm. Over the next few weeks, they fall into a quiet routine. Jessie slowly befriends the dog, which makes Mason happy. One day, Jessie sets her untouched bowl of porridge back on the table while watching Mason, who is deeply focused on a chess game he's playing by himself. She asks how Mason knew her uncle. Mason replies that they served together in the Royal Marines. She then asks his name, but Mason tells her it doesn't matter. So Jessie asks for the dog's name instead. Mason admits he never gave him a name. Excited, Jessie decides to name him Jack. Looking over at the chessboard, she tells Mason to move the black queen to f2. The moment he does, she smiles and announces that it's checkmate. He then takes another look at her wound and says grimly that it's infected. Jessie suggests they go to a hospital, but Mason shakes his head and says he'll get the necessary supplies from the mainland. After he leaves, Jessie looks through his drawings and is clearly impressed. Then she notices something surprising. Mason has actually opened her gift. Inside is a small paperweight with a tiny lighthouse inside it. On the mainland, Mason enters a pharmacy with his head down, carefully avoiding the cameras. He fills a basket with medicine and pays before leaving. Meanwhile, at London Hall, a parliamentary committee questions an MI6 chief named Manafort about violating the privacy of British citizens. They accuse the agency of tracking calls, emails, and CCTV footage to build an advanced surveillance system called Thea. One committee member points out that they only discovered about Thea after someone hacked into MI6's servers. Manafort argues that Thea helps MI6 make better-informed decisions and allows them to predict threats much faster. However, he fails to convince the committee and is told that both he and the Prime Minister Fordham are now under investigation. Later, Manafort informs Prime Minister Fordham about the hearing. She calmly tells him to step down for now, explaining that with the election approaching, she can't risk a public scandal. Instead, she asks him to focus on their other project, reminding him that he's the greatest spy master the country has ever produced. As a sacrificial lamb, Fordham says she will appoint Roberta as interim chief of MI6, hinting that after the election, Manafort will get his position back. Back on the mainland, Mason stops at a clothing shop to buy a few outfits for Jesse. After making the purchase, he quietly leaves the store. At MI6 headquarters, Roberta and her team make a shocking discovery. Mason's retinal scan matches that of a terrorist wanted for bombing the embassy in Algeria. Roberta immediately asks for his location. When they tell her he's in Scotland, she immediately sends an assault team to the island at once. Meanwhile, Mason carefully bandages Jesse's foot and gives her the clothes he bought. She thanks him for the outfits and the sweets he brought along. Mason simply tells her she's welcome. That night, instead of the usual porridge, he cooks spaghetti, which makes Jesse visibly happy. A moment later, the dog suddenly whimpers and begins sniffing the air. Mason instantly realizes something is wrong. He looks outside and sees an assault team approaching, heavily armed. Quickly, he tells Jesse to hide in the bathroom and not come out until he returns to get her. Jesse grabs a knife and hides in the bathroom while Mason steps outside with a knife of his own. The assault team has been given orders to kill him on sight. Mason cuts a rope, triggering several booby traps he had set up, taking out a few of the officers. He then switches on the bright lights, momentarily blinding the remaining officers. They recover quickly and begin firing, and Mason is hit during the exchange. The officers climb up and split up to search for him. But Mason moves through the darkness with ruthless precision, taking them down one by one. One officer manages to enter the lighthouse. The dog immediately attacks and bites him, but the officer shoots the dog.
I found a girl. Extracting her now.
Just then, Mason spots Jesse. From a distance, he takes aim and shoots the officer. Mason flips the officer's body over so the camera isn't pointing toward them. Shaken, Jesse asks who those men were, but Mason ignores the question. Instead, he tells her to wait there for a couple of minutes while he heads back inside. The first thing he sees is his dog. Quietly, he says goodbye. Then he takes out a burner phone and calls someone, telling them that he is off the reservation and that he has baggage with him. After the call, he destroys the phone. When Mason returns, Jesse asks where Jack is. Mason simply tells her that they need to leave. Back at MI6 headquarters, Roberta is stunned that Mason managed to take out the entire assault team by himself. She decides to send one of MI6's most skilled operatives, Workman, to take him down. At the same time, she orders her team to find out who the girl traveling with him is. Meanwhile, Mason and Jesse reach the mainland. Jesse notices that he's injured, but Mason brushes it off. They walk into a quiet neighborhood where Mason spots a truck and decides they can use it. He tells Jesse to wait outside while he breaks into the house to find the keys. For Jesse's protection, he hands her a rifle, shows her how to hold it properly, and warns her not to put her finger on the trigger unless necessary. Then, Mason breaks into the house. Inside, he searches for the keys but is suddenly caught by a young boy and his father. Before the situation escalates, Jesse appears and points the gun at the man, telling him to put his weapon down and help Mason since he's injured. She promises she won't hurt them. At MI6 headquarters, a tech specialist named Madison discovers that someone has tampered with the agency's records, replacing Mason's profile with that of a terrorist. She informs Roberta that Mason was actually an MI6 officer who was supposedly killed in action 10 years earlier. Madison attempts to access his mission logs, but the system returns a file not found error. Roberta tells her to keep digging. A moment later, Madison reports that operations intercepted a 999 call from a farm in Scotland.
Matching Mason and our girl.
Meanwhile, Manafort arrives at a high-tech building. Entering his private office, he logs into the MI6 servers through a secret backdoor he built into the Thea system.
Shit.
He then pulls up the live camera feeds inside MI6 headquarters. Roberta informs the team that their target is not a terrorist and that Mason must be taken alive for questioning. She then asks for Workman's status, and the team confirms that he's already en route to the farm. At the same time, Manafort sends Workman a message telling him that this is no longer a regular mission. It is now a Black Kite operation. At the house, the man finishes stitching Mason's wound. Mason thanks him and asks for the keys to the truck. The man nods and says they're by the front door. Just then, Mason notices the boy is missing and asks where he went. The father calls out for his son, who soon appears looking nervous. Mason studies him carefully and asks if he called the police. The boy nods. Mason calmly tells Jesse to hide and not move. At MI6 headquarters, Madison informs the team that local police are responding to the call. Roberta immediately orders her to tell them not to engage, since Workman is already on his way. The father and son attempt to run. Mason warns them not to, but before they can get far, a shot rings out. The father is killed instantly, shot by Workman. Roberta demands that the team locate where the shots are coming from. Mason quickly pulls the boy to safety and tells him to stay where he is. Mason slips out the back of the house with Jesse. On the way, he takes down several police officers. He and Jesse jump into a police car and drive off. Back at MI6 headquarters, Roberta asks one of her team members to patch her through to Workman, but he replies that Workman has turned off his communications. Mason speeds away, but Workman quickly catches up and begins ramming his car repeatedly into Mason's. Thinking fast, Mason swerves sharply to the left, setting a trap that throws Workman off for a moment. However, Workman recovers and resumes the chase. In the end, Mason slams on the brakes, forcing Workman forward, then crashes into his vehicle and escapes the scene. Soon after, Mason and Jesse abandon the damaged car and switch to another one. Workman slowly pulls himself out of the wreckage. Just then, a passing car stops, and a woman rolls down her window to ask if he's all right. Moments later, a police car pulls up behind them. Without hesitation, Workman shoots the officer and then turns his attention toward the terrified woman. Back in London, Roberta calls Manafort to learn more about Michael Mason, the former MI6 member who had managed to take down an entire assault team on his own. Manafort finally reveals the truth. Years ago, they ran an off-the-books program of elite operatives known as the Black Kites, officers untethered from MI6's oversight. Mason, he explains, was one of the very first. However, Manafort keeps one vital secret from Roberta. The program has resumed. Manafort tells her that Mason was exceptional at his job until one mission changed everything. He had been sent to assassinate a foreign intelligence officer, but instead, he spared the man, falsified the report, and disappeared. When Roberta asks why he would do that, Manafort guesses that Mason may have been bribed with a large amount of money. He warns her that Mason is an extremely skilled assassin and that she will need her entire unit to bring him down. Shortly afterward, Roberta approaches Madison, who says she found a Black Kite mission files on MI6's backup server. Madison explains that Mason had been helping an Iranian scientist defect after the man gave the British government crucial intelligence on Iran's nuclear program. But instead of protecting him, Mason was later ordered to eliminate the scientist for deniability. Mason refused. Meanwhile, Jesse asks Mason if he has a family. Mason simply says no, explaining that family only complicates things. Jesse replies that she would rather it be complicated than not have her mother and uncle, and adds that now she has no one. Mason tells her that life is often unfair, and no child should endure what she has gone through. He asks her not to let it break her spirit. Jesse nods. She then gives Mason a drawing he had made of his dog, saying that at least he had Jack, his family. Mason smiles softly and tells her she should keep it. Later, Mason stops near a church and tells Jesse to keep her head down so the cameras won't catch her. Even so, a nearby car's dash camera captures them. Manafort notices the alert but quietly deletes it from the MI6 system and instead sends the location coordinates directly to Workman. They enter the church, and Mason greets Arthur Booth, one of his old friends who used to work in the MI6 tech department. Booth takes them to his secluded house. Once inside, Mason tells Jesse to get herself a drink. Jesse snaps, saying that if he wants her to leave, he should just say so.
It's okay.
Mason then explains the situation to Booth. He tells him that he served with Jesse's uncle and that he needs a safe way out for the girl. Booth raises an eyebrow and jokingly asks if Mason has grown sentimental due to his old age. But Mason shakes his head and says, Jesse is simply a victim. someone who was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Outside, Jesse spots the medicine tablets that Booth has been taking. Booth explains to Mason that, before leaving MI6, he helped build Thea, an advanced surveillance network. As he logs in, Mason's and Jesse's profiles appear on the screen. Booth reveals that when Mason disappeared years ago, he secretly changed Mason's identity in the system to that of an unknown oil worker. Now, however, someone has replaced that identity with the profile of a terrorist, complete with an immediate kill order. Mason immediately realizes who is behind it: his former boss, Manafort. Booth asks if Manafort still wants him dead. Mason nods and says that since he broke the rules, Manafort will never stop hunting him. Mason asks Booth to erase his profile, but Booth explains that it's too late. Mason has already been identified. With a sigh, Mason asks Booth to keep Jesse safe with him. Booth refuses. When Mason asks why, Jesse answers for him. Booth has cancer. She explains that her mother used to take the same medication before she died.
Sorry I'm such a drag to you.
Booth quietly admits he has maybe a year left. Mason nods sympathetically and asks if they can take Jesse to Kamal, someone who might be able to get her safely out of the country. Booth firmly refuses, reminding Mason that Kamal is a dangerous trafficker and that he won't be able to deal with him anymore, not without the MI6 backing he once had. Mason calmly tells him to let him worry about that. After a moment, Booth reluctantly agrees and starts getting the car ready. Then Mason tells Jesse they have to leave. Jesse asks if he really planned to leave her here. Mason replies that her safety is his priority. Suddenly, they hear movement outside. Mason immediately tells Jesse to hide while he waits for whoever is out there. Moments later, Workman fires through the door. A brutal fight breaks out, with Mason gradually gaining the upper hand. During the struggle, Workman drops his gun and Jesse grabs it. She points the weapon at Workman and tells him to let Mason go. Workman suddenly lunges for his gun, but Mason grabs a nail gun and fires. He then pulls Jesse with him, and the two rush to Booth's car. As they speed away, Workman fires several shots at the car, but they manage to escape.
Who was that?
Him! 20 years ago!
Moments later, Workman receives a message from Manafort. Soon after, Manafort orders his assistant to prepare the Black Kite team. Booth hands Mason a burner phone and warns him to be careful. Then he turns to Jesse and tells her to take care of herself. Jesse thanks him. As they continue their journey, Jesse suddenly says that she should have killed the man earlier. Then she hesitates and admits that thinking that way feels wrong, and wonders if she's becoming like Mason. Mason gently tells her that she is nothing like him. He promises that after tonight all of this will be over, and she will be able to start a new life, safe and secure. But alone, Jesse mutters. She then asks what he will do. Mason replies that he'll probably find another quiet island somewhere. Jesse suggests she could come with him, but Mason shakes his head. He tells her she doesn't want a life like his, always looking over her shoulder and constantly on the run. Night falls as they arrive at Kamal's club. Mason tells Jesse to stay close to him. Back at headquarters, Madison alerts Roberta that someone has logged into Thea from an unknown external location. Roberta tells her to trace it immediately. Outside the club, Jesse notices a camera and points it out, but Mason says it doesn't matter. He steps forward and asks one of the bouncers to take him to Kamal. Meanwhile, Manafort tries to erase Mason's location from the system, but suddenly finds himself locked out. A moment later, Madison discovers the truth. The person accessing the system is Manafort himself. Inside the club, the bouncer leads Jesse and Mason to Kamal. Kamal sizes Mason up with a smirk, mocking him and saying his own country has betrayed him. Mason doesn't respond. He simply states that he needs a way to get the girl out of the country with a new identity.
No.
Mason reminds Kamal that he was able to operate with impunity all these years because Mason and Manafort had been tipping off the authorities about Kamal's rivals, eliminating his competition and keeping his business safe. Kamal shrugs and says Manafort is gone. Mason shakes his head, warning that Manafort is no longer restrained by the system and is more powerful than ever, a threat to both of them. Then, Mason explains that the moment he walked into the bar, the security cameras would have identified him. That means MI6 operatives within a couple hundred miles will be looking for him within minutes. Mason offers Kamal a deal. He'll take care of Manafort and bury all their secrets with him, if Kamal helps Jesse escape. After thinking it over, Kamal tells them to wait in the private room. Jesse immediately begs Mason to come with her, but Mason tells her he only made the deal for her. Jesse realizes what that means. She says he wants to die, because if he truly wanted to live, he would be leaving with her. Mason quietly replies that people like him don't get to live a normal life. Then he tells her to be strong. Jesse asks him to promise that he isn't going to die. Mason says nothing. Meanwhile, Roberta orders her tactical team to capture Mason and the girl alive. Manafort, on the other hand, commands his team to kill them both, pointing out that the girl is Mason's weakness and can be used against him. Back inside the club, Kamal returns with a new identity for Jesse. He explains that she will be sent to Spain and kept in one of his safe houses for a while. He tells Mason the boat leaves the Isle of Dogs in 30 minutes. Roberta's tactical team radios in, saying they are 2 minutes away. She quickly realizes the armed men entering the club must belong to Manafort. Mason notices the approaching guards. Calmly, he leads Jesse through the crowd while quietly taking down several of them along the way. But soon, they are cornered. Mason fires at one of the attackers, and the gunshot sends the entire bar into panic. Grabbing Jesse's hand, he pushes through the chaos toward the exit. During the struggle, one of the men stabs Mason with a knife. Jesse jumps on the attacker, trying to choke him from behind. Mason manages to shoot him. In the confusion, however, another one grabs Jesse and drags her away. Mason quickly calls Booth and tells him that Manafort's men have taken Jesse. Booth hacks into nearby cameras and quickly finds her. He tells Mason that Jesse is being carried toward a black transit van. The tactical team soon spots Mason, but he takes them down with precise, efficient moves. Fighting his way through them, he finally reaches Jesse and rescues her. Just then, Mason sees workmen running toward them. Without wasting a second, he takes a nearby motorcycle and speeds away with Jesse. They reach the port. Reaching a staircase that leads down to the docks, they arrive just as a boat pulls in below them. Mason turns to Jesse and reassures her that she'll be okay. Jesse begs him to come with her so they can live a normal life. Mason gently tells her this is the only way he can save her. Jesse insists that leaving together is the only way she can save him. Mason gives a faint smile and tells her she already has. At that moment, Workman appears and opens fire. Mason quickly pushes Jesse onto the boat while she watches helplessly. Mason and Workman engage in a brutal fight. In the end, Mason overpowers him and kills him. The next morning, Manafort is enjoying a glass of whiskey when he suddenly notices several of his guards lying dead on the lawn. Mason steps forward. Manafort calmly tells him that Mason was once his greatest weapon, but he broke the core rule of the Black Kites: loyalty. Instead of completing his mission, Mason chose his conscience. Manafort then reveals that he now has full control over the Black Kites and invites Mason to join him again. Mason responds with a single gunshot. 3 months later, MI6 is still quietly monitoring Jesse, hoping she might lead them to Mason. Roberta tells her team that Mason managed to stay hidden for 10 years, but he came out of hiding for Jesse. That means there's always a chance he might show up again. Suddenly, one of the surveillance cameras shifts slightly. A worker nearby hands Jesse an envelope, saying a friend asked her to deliver it. Jesse opens it and finds a black queen chess piece inside. She quickly asks where the man is. The woman replies that he was just there a moment ago. Jesse smiles, realizing that Mason has kept his promise to her to stay alive.